Hello, and welcome back to Coding with Capo. This is episode 3, and this will wrap up our 3-part series on ChatGPT. Now, we already have ChatGPT client working, and we already have the conversion to an MP3 file working with Google Text-to-Speech. But these are local, they're kind of stuck in our local environment. How can we get them out and send them somewhere? Today I'm going to be incorporating Webex. That's right, the Webex client. We're going to make a space, and we're going to send the ChatGPT answers into that space, and eventually send the MP3 file into that space. You're not going to believe this. And the great news is, it's just a few lines of code. I'm going to explain the code, we're going to go over it. Please make sure you've watched episode 1 and episode 2 to bring you up to speed. And we're going to wrap up our project by sending our ChatGPT answers and our MP3 files into Webex. Stay tuned. So the first thing we're going to need is the Webex client. Now, don't worry about the pricing and solutions and all this stuff. It is an enterprise solution, but there is a sign up and it's free and you can install the client and get going with today's exercise. That is on webex.com. Now, once we have the client, and we're going to come back to this page in a second, we're going to go into Webex and hit plus and create a space. Now I'm going to call this space Coding with Capo, and we can add people if you want to add your family or friends to show them your work, you can do so. So we're going to create this space, and now we're in this space, and I'm just have it off to the side to hide my other spaces. But in this room, we're going to send our information and our MP3 file and our ChatGPT responses. How do we do this? This is done with something known as an application programmable interface, an API. You could think of ChatGPT and Google Text-to-Speech as APIs as well. Well, now we're going to tap into the Webex API. So now we're going to visit developer.webex.com, make sure we sign in, and we're going to go to the documentation. Now there's a lot of documentation, but I suggest we're going to scroll down and go to the APIs and scroll down, and we're going to go to messaging, reference, and what we need is a room. We need our room ID where we want to send our chat. And we need an API key. So we're going to go to rooms, and we're going to go to get, list rooms, which is this one here, rooms. Now this button right here is important, and you can see it has our bearer token. This API requires authorization in the form of a token. So we're going to click this button and say OK. All right. Now, once we have that key, we're going to need to save that somewhere. So hang on to that key. All right. Now, what we can do is scroll down and click Run. And I should have, I believe, as my first space, Coding with Capo. And you can see it has some information about it. Now, we need this ID. So remember, the room ID and the bearer token from the Webex. Now, moving along, we don't have to just do this inside of the browser. I'm going to introduce a new tool today that I recommend you install, and it is also free, and it is called Postman. So go to postman.com and download Postman, and you can see an example of what it looks like, and we're going to use it in a second. But as you can see, we can build, test, debug, document. It's an API client, if you will. So we're going to use that with our Webex token, and we need our room ID for our code. Now, before we get started, what do we do as good housekeeping, good programmers, good development practices? We're going to make a branch. We're going to make a branch here called Webex. And we'll change to that branch in a second. Now, in our code, where we have our .env file, we have our Open API key. We're going to add our Webex Room token and our Webex Room ID. Now, I've blanked them out because I don't want you to see mine, but put the token here and the room ID here, and we're going to use those in a second. Now, before we use our code, let's hop into Postman. And what we're going to do is write a collection called Webex, and in that collection, we can have different requests, right, by adding a request. And our request is going to be for our rooms. Now you can see in the authorization, you can't see my full token. That's why I'm okay sharing this, and it expires in 12 hours. We need to put our token in here, right? So then what we're going to do, and the headers, there's no headers, nothing special about this, is webexapis.com v1 rooms as a get. We're going to send this, and I should have, there's my coding with Capo room and my room ID. So that's Postman. Instead of using the developer browser, you can use Postman for this. So I have my room ID, and we're all set to go. I've updated my environment file, and I'm going to change by clicking on the command palette and git fetch to refresh our repository and change into the Webex branch. Now, here comes today's coding additions. So we need to add a few things. One thing is we're going to be working with JavaScript object notation. So we need the JSON and import that into Python. We already have OpenAI for gTTS and our environment variable. We're going to use something called the requests library, a very important library. Remember how I used Postman? Remember how I used the browser? Well, with Python, I can use requests and request a get against the URL. So we're going to use that. Now we're going to add something else from requests. Okay, the tool belt for requests, something we have to pip install into our virtual environment, which we'll do in a second. We want the multi-part encoder. You may have heard of encoding, and we're going to import multi-part encoder. Now, encoding is how we put things into certain formats that the computers we use can understand. Encode it as a text file or as ASCII, you may have heard, or encode it, in our case, as an MP3 file. Now, we're not quite done here. We have our environment and our API key. Well, we need to add two keys, and I recommend you just copy this twice and change this from Open API key to Webex Token. And instead of Open API key here, we're going to get Webex Token from our environment file and change this one to Webex Room ID. And again, here we have to update this to Webex Room ID. So now we're ready to make calls against Webex. And we have our question, and we're not going to change this at all. Okay. And we have our create MP3 file. We're not going to change that at all. But we're going to make first a new function, and we're going to call it here, right, as let's check if we have a Webex token. So this doesn't fail if someone didn't put a Webex token in. So we're going to say if Webex token, enter, and then indent it inside of it for Python to interpret it. Let's do send chat to Webex, and we're going to send it our answer. Remember, our answer is the answer that we're returning here to answer. Now, actually, let's modify this and make this a little easier to read. Let's change this result here to answer, just so that it's a little easier for us to understand, and we'll change all of this to answer. Now, we haven't made our function. You can see it's underlining. Python's not happy because we haven't done define send chat to Webex And this one is going to have our answer that's been passed to it from our create MP3 or our ask question, function. Remember, ask question function asks the question from the input that the user adds, in case you haven't been following along with the episodes. So now, all right, now this is going to take a little bit to write, but we want to set our URL, a URL, as HTTPS, and this one is going to be webexapis.com/ and we're going to do messages. Okay, we need to go to messages is what we want to do here, because we want to send a message, right? So now we're going to have a payload, which is a JSON dump. I'm going to explain that in a second. We're going to write some JSON here, and what the dump does is dump the string into valid JSON, right? So there's JSON dumps or dump string and loads, load string. In this case, we want to dump this following string, which is our room ID. Now remember, this is the payload to make a valid request. Similar to if I was to do this in Postman, maybe I have a messages example of Postman I can in my here, right? So post a message, we need the room ID and then the message we want to post, all right? So this is the payload we're going to pass through the requests library to the API. Now this is going to be an F string, a formatted string that has our WebEx room ID from our environment variable file. Okay, and we need to put a comma for the valid JSON, and then in quotes our text, the message we want to send, which is going to be another formatted string that says we asked ChatGPT, and then our question that we asked it. And let's put a question mark. Do I already have a question mark? Well, they might have put the question mark, so let's not add the question mark. Okay, so we have our URL and our payload. The next thing we need are headers, the things that are added to our request as a header. You may have heard of headers, so that the API that is receiving this request knows how to interpret it, right? So we're going to add headers equals, and what we need is a couple things. Remember we authorized, where does our token come in? Well, if you look at it in Postman, remember Postman, I didn't show you this. If we go back to my get rooms, what we can do is click on this amazing button here that says code. And it gives us the code to make the valid request. And this is where I'm getting most of my code from, right? So our headers is going to have authorization, and that's going to be another F string that is our bearer, and then our WebEx token. Okay, so that's our authorization is the bearer token, and we can accept content type of application JSON, right? We want the content to be JavaScript object notation. So now we have everything we need, our URL, our payload, and our headers, which includes our authorization and our room ID. And there's something not quite right here. Oh, I didn't wrap this inside of curly brackets to make it valid Python. And it's still not happy here. What have I done wrong? Let's quickly look here. I have a comma here. Oh, I see. I have no, that needs to be like that. Room ID needs to be in quotes. I see what I've done. I put that on the inside. Excuse me, everybody. We all make little mistakes. So our proper JSON structure here is the room ID, right, and colon on the other side of the quotation mark, and the text. So we have our everything we need to make our request. We're going to say response. The response to our request equals requests dot request. We're going to make a request that is a post. Remember we were doing gets to get information? Well, we're sending a message, so that means we need to post something. And what are we posting to? That URL we defined, with the headers we defined, and the data as the payload we defined. Now, what I like to really do here, response has a lot of stuff. It has the status code. Remember in Postman when I was making requests? Let me show you a status code. If we make this request, we can see here that there is this 200 OK, standard response for successful request. Now, with a post, it might be 204 or 202, I believe, or 200. But let's print a message to ourselves with a formatted string that says the Webex API call had a response code of, and then our variable response. Because response is going to be the status code. If we want the payload, right, we don't really have a payload. We're sending a message. So all we need is to look at the response code. All right? So now, that is our we asked ChatGPT. So what we're going to do is send this, copy this from payload and headers and print, copy it a second time, and let's change our prompt. All we need to change here. And what we're going to say is, here was ChatGPT's, ChatGPT's answer with a \n. Now what is that? That means a new line. Let's force a line break and print or send the answer that ChatGPT with the same information. All right. So what we should get in Webex is the question we asked and the answer if we have a valid Webex token. So let's save this file. Now, remember the virtual environment. And if we look at our imports and froms, we still need this request tool belt. So I'm going to go source, and I'm going to cheat and use episode 2 and pip install requests tool belt. And that will pip install it. Now, if we do a pip list, we can see we have our gTTS for our text-to-speech, our OpenAI, our requests, and now the request tool belt. And we're ready to go. I'm going to clear the screen with clear. It's like Python 3, ChatGPT. Oh, I got to get back into the folder. CD, coding with Capo. And we're going to go Python 3, ChatGPT client. And let's, for the question, just say, please order the Beatles. Please order all Beatles albums by sales. I don't know, something fun. And now we're going to watch this and look for our response codes from the API. ChatGPT is thinking about it, and we're going to remember our URL, webexapis.com/v1/messages, our payload, our headers with our authorization, room ID, web token, and we're doing a requests.request. So there are the answers. Now we should get hopefully 200 series API responses into Webex. And if that happens, then we'll jump into Webex. This is great, 200. Now, if we hop into our Webex room, here is our question. Here is the answer, right into Webex. Pretty incredible, right? Now let's take this a step further and add one more function to wrap things up. And let's send the MP3 file into Webex. And I've got something special I want to show you. So we're going to go back to our code. And what we're going to do is we are going to add a function called send MP3 to Webex. We don't need anything to pass into that. Okay, we're just going to define send MP3 to Webex. Now this is where we're going to need our multi-part encoder, but we can still copy some of our, well, we can't really send anything. Now this is quite a bit to write, but bear with me and it will make sense to you. So we need a variable called message with MP3, and that's actually going to instantiate that multi-part encoder. And inside of the multi-part encoder, we need a few things. We need the room ID still, and that's going to be an F string of our Webex room ID. We're going to need the text still, and our text in this case is going to be our we asked ChatGPT, and then our question, and then this needs a comma, and we need to add our files. And our files needs to go in quotes with the colon, and that is going to be a new bracket with an F string of our question.mp3 file. Oops. And that we need to open. Same thing. Our question.mp3. Sorry. And we need to RB that, right block it. And that is going to be the type of audio/mp3. We need to specify the file type here. Now I need to close off these things properly. That gets closed. That gets closed. I think that's it. Oh, I already closed those. Okay. All right, so now we have this message MP3, which is a multi-part encoder that loads up the required things: room, text, file, and the type, which is an MP3. So now we have to invoke that as a response. So what we're going to do is another response equals, and we're back to requests.post. Just to show you another way of doing it, we can just say requests.post, and this is going to go to our URL and our data. What have I missed here? Once it goes to request.post. If maybe this needs to be an F string of our URL. Yeah, and then what we need is our data, and our data in this case is going to be our messages with MP3. Let's write this a little cleaner. That, have that, and then what we need is our headers equals, and we didn't separate our headers. Let's actually do that. Let's grab these headers and put them in here. Not a bad idea. We could have done the URL as well, but I don't know that. See, URL is not defined yet. Hang on. I need the URL as well. The headers. Now these headers, we're actually going to copy them. Now this is going to be ugly, but we're going to fix it. So cut them. We're not going to use them that way. And here where it says headers equals headers, highlight that and paste it in. Don't worry, we'll fix it. And then bring everything back onto the single line. Okay, and we're going to adjust this ever so slightly. So bring everything back onto the single line for requests. And this application JSON needs to change. This is why we're doing it this way, because it's not application JSON. It's a message MP3, which is an audio MP3. So what we're going to do is change the content type to an F string and paste in that message type .content underscore type. All right, so, and I think I have one extra. I believe that looks good, no complaints. So now let's ask the question, and let's do the Rolling Stones this time. So we're going to run our ChatGPT client one more time and say, please list all the Rolling Stones albums by sales. Ha. So it's going to think about it, give us our response, send it in to our Webex room, which is going to be exciting. So let's go into our Webex room and watch this live. So as you can see, we have the MP3 file and our list from ChatGPT. Pretty cool, right? Well, let's finish this up with something even more exciting. On my phone, you can see I have my phone here. Well, I have the Webex client installed, so I can actually listen.
Here are the Rolling
to the
Stones
MP3
albums
file.
ranked by worldwide sales. 1. Hot Rocks 1964 to 1971. 1971. 12x Platinum.
So you get the idea. Right to our phone, right to Webex, MP3, ChatGPT answers. We've wrapped this all up in 3 episodes. Pretty exciting stuff. Let's finish up our code exercise. So what we're going to do is we're going to delete that, and we're going to push in our code. And notice that it's just the one Python file, right? Adding Webex. We're going to save that, commit the change, and make sure you do your pull request in GitHub and merge your code in. So over 3 episodes, maybe half an hour together, we've made a ChatGPT client. It gives us the answer with text input. We've converted it to MP3. We wrote a standalone little bit of code reusing our function to make a text input to MP3. And now today we've added Webex to get our responses and our MP3 files into a different ecosystem known as Webex. And you can see it works on our phone. So thank you for joining me for these first 3 episodes of Coding with Capo. On our next series of Coding with Capo, we're going to shift gears a bit and move into some network automation. I wanted to do some fun, family-friendly exercises first and ease you into the Python experience. But there's going to be much more to come in this series. Please subscribe to CiscoU's YouTube channel. Please like and share this video and the other videos. It would really help establish a community and a following for this series. Thanks again. Get coding, and the sky's the limit. We'll see you soon.